Do better than that,
Thank you, Madam Postmaster. Let's say I have a time machine, and I take that time machine back to the summer of 1914, and I gather all of the major generals of all the European powers of the time in one room, Toastmaster style. And we have table topics. And I ask them to speak extemporaneously about how would you describe war in a few brief sentences. And up until that point in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, war had been considered a gentlemanly affair. It was led by fairly noble people leading large armies in brief, maybe week-long campaigns, and they'd fight each other. There would be some casualties, and then the conflict would be over and everything would be resolved. But that was the summer of 1914. And only a month later, in August of 1914, and in September, in the Battle of the Frontiers, the first major battle of World War I, there were 670,000 casualties total. This is combined for both sides in 1 month of fighting. To put this into context, the Battle of Waterloo was fought over 3 days, and there were approximately 69,000 casualties total. So the overall scale of war from the very beginning was very, very different from anything they had ever seen, from anything they had ever known. If you were to ask them before the war started how long it would last, they would say it'll likely be over by Christmas of 1914. And as we now have the benefit of history, knowing it did not end anywhere near that time. So the scale was completely different from anything that any historian had ever seen in warfare. Russia ran out of artillery shells in the first month of conflict because they didn't anticipate just how many guns they would have to fire and how long and how intense the battles would be. Germany had to move supplies east and west using their extensive railway system. And it was very, very clear that World War I was different. World War I made it clear that war was no longer a battle just between armies, it was a battle between nations, between their citizens, their industrial capacity, their ability to wage war over long periods of time. Battles previously took on average less than a week. Now you have battles, and the bloodiest battle of them all, the Battle of Verdun, which took 9 months. 9 months of sustained conflict in the trenches. So operations research was born in that environment. It was born in that environment of high demands and extremely constrained resources. They didn't have the benefit of short conflict. They had to be able to run the unfortunate long marathon that was World War I. So from there there was a very brilliant mathematician. The weapons of war evolved over time, and in World War I you had the machine gun, the tank, the aircraft, but eventually they realized there was one more weapon that they needed to add to the arsenal, both sides of the conflict, and that weapon was advanced mathematics. So you have mathematicians like Frederick Lanchester who used differential equations to model which army would win, the army that has more numbers or the army that has the more advanced technology. And he was able to quantify these things which had previously been considered an art. War was considered an art previously. But it was becoming very clear as the war continued that it had become more of a science than anything else. And there are new technologies that we hadn't even dealt with before, like submarines. Most of the navies of the world spent their money, the majority of their money, on battleships, big battleships. But all the battles were inconclusive. But the most dramatic effect that the navies had during that war was submarines. And eventually, we were able to develop convoys. The initial reaction that we had was, if we spread out all of the ships carrying cargo going to England, it'll be harder to find them, and they'll suffer less casualties. That was very, very wrong. And so they had to model it with pieces on a board and six-sided die, and they realized that the best way to perform it was with a convoy. You group all of them together with escorts, and then you escort them across the Atlantic. So operations research became very quickly, how do we quantify decision making? How do we take what is usually our instincts, what we have gathered over time from our observations, and use the mathematical tools that are available? And unfortunately, war was not prevented again, and indeed the Second World War began as well. But the Allies were able to bring the skills that had been learned and gathered from the First World War and advance them that much further. The reason why the United States was able to wage a war all the way across the vastness of the Pacific was because they were able to optimize the way of supporting, or they were able to optimize the process of shipping parts, material, and men across the ocean to the various bases. If it were not for the operations research methods that they had learned, then it would have been a much less efficient process, and likely the Allies would not have been as successful, or the war would have gone on for that much longer. And there was a Roman general a long time ago named Cincinnatus who famously, once a war was over, turned his sword into a plowshare. He was able to take what he had used for war and apply it to peacetime afterwards once the war was over. And in a similar fashion, operations research kind of found its new niche in the new industrial world, in the Cold War industrial world, so that it now has an impact everywhere in business today. It's known by many names: operational research, management science. But whether you realize it or not, operations research has an impact on your everyday life. If you've ordered something on Amazon and it's come to you through UPS, operations research has gone towards making that process much smoother and much faster. The reason why 2-day delivery is viable and affordable is because they're able to make the most of the resources they have. If you have a computer at home or a phone in your pocket, the reason why they're able to fit so many transistors on one chip is because they're able to optimize that through mathematical techniques. So operations research survives today, and it's here to stay. And as we live in a more and more quantified world, it'll be a bigger and bigger part of our lives. So let us hope that we can take this tool that was unfortunately born in terrible carnage and bring it to some good. Thank you.
Let's do better, Joanna. Thank you, Madam Toastmaster, Toastmasters. It is an honor to evaluate John. This is not my first time, and it's fun to watch his growth as he progresses through the manuals. And today his growth was, his speech was speech 7, which is research your topic. His objectives were to collect information about his topic from numerous sources, to carefully support his points and opinions with specific facts, examples, and illustrations gathered through that research, and he hit those objectives on point. The opening was excellent. I loved the way you used time travel, which immediately grabbed our attention. Everyone kind of seemed to perk up the minute you mentioned it, and you brought that into a very serious topic. And you did that very well. The topic for this speech is very good for this audience, and that's one of the things that he was to look for. And I'll go through that list and go through and let you know how you did on those. Yes, very good for this room. Ding. The question is, was it researched well? And it was researched very well. There was a lot that went into this speech. You had a ton of information that clearly you didn't just think up. You had to go and find that information, and that was well displayed in your speech. Your main points, it asks about supporting main points, and here's where I'm going to give a little bit of constructive advice or critique. I wasn't quite sure which were the main points. So I knew that gentleman, the war used to be a gentleman art form, and it turned into something that now needs tools, and it's a science. And so was that the purpose, or was the purpose to talk about Just the different way that it all came together to now we get to use those, the advantages from how war has changed. So was it to inform us, or was it to kind of say, hey guys, we can find something good out of this? So it was effectively organized. Again, we had the timeline from way early, time traveling to the past, to going to the current or recent wars, to even today, using your UPS 2-day delivery or your cell phone. And you had great body language all throughout. Vocal variety, could have used a little more vocal variety, but great body language. Again, what we would have done differently, just maybe add a little bit more of a stress of what is that point, what is the purpose, and a transition from the opening, a clear transition right into what your purpose is, what you want us to know, into a very solid ending that sells that purpose. So yes, we really want you to know, like, rejoice in what's happening here. And now you know what happened. So really sell that to us. It was eloquent, it was very well researched. He made a topic that could otherwise be, kind of worrisome, interesting, and informative. And I look forward to speech 8, which he will do, getting comfortable with visual aids. So, and that was actually one last idea, was to use more visual aids. So you will have much to look forward to in your next speech, where you get to practice doing that. Thank you.